Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Pierre Marie Aubert. Sorry. I've just joined the IDDRI in Paris, so I'm quite new in this project. I'm going to try to present some preliminary results about fieldwork which has been carried out in Ethiopia in 2013 by my predecessor, Pierre Aubert. Maybe you met him in Addis Ababa. Okay, so the idea here is to speak about the relationship between governments and development partners to understand better the way FNS policies are framed and implemented in the field. Okay, so as an introduction, just say that this work is part of the WP10, whose overall aim is to assess local FNS policy strategies and the coherence of the European Union aid and development policy. And more particularly, it fits into the task 10.1, which aims at assessing FNS policy strategies in developing countries. So our task at IDDRI was to look at the processes of FNS policies formulation and donor strategies in developing countries to understand what make those policies evolve, like how do they evolve and how do they better address FNS issues. So to answer this question, we have two strands of analysis. The first one being like the question of improving food and nutrition security. And as we have seen during those 3 days, there's no blueprint, there's no silver bullet to address food and nutrition security issues. And we need ad hoc policies and adapted to their context, which means that there's a need for space for experimentation in terms of policy. The other strand of analysis we had in mind was that of the question of improvement of aid effectiveness in the context after the Paris Declaration about coordination, harmonization, and alignment of donor strategies to government policies. So the question was how to address this kind of paradoxical situation. The question is like to which extent a strong coordination between FNS policy can leave space for experimentation, for innovation. That was basically our question. And the question was also like from this analysis, what kind of recommendation can we address to donors and especially to the European Union? As Arlen said, the European Union is quite involved in Ethiopia. So our question was, how do the negotiations between the country, and here Ethiopia, and its donors contribute to FNS policy's evolution? The case of Ethiopia was really interesting for us. Of course, there are some very strong FNS issues there, but also because Ethiopia is very frequently presented as a kind of success story of aid coordination through several bodies that I will present a little bit later. So our thesis is which I'm trying to demonstrate in this presentation, is that the creation of a specific body for donors coordination in terms of food and nutrition security has allowed for both, first, a stronger donors alignment to the country policies for FNS, but also this specific body has also allowed for the creation of rooms for maneuver for donors to advance their own agenda in terms of food and nutrition security. This is the idea we're going to try to demonstrate. So just a quick summary, I will present very quickly our methodological framework, then the case study, I will go very quickly on that. The first results will be that the Ministry of Agriculture is managed to align donors' intervention through this famous body, which is called the Rural and Economic Development and Food Security Sector Working Group. And that this body is also used by the donors as a platform to advocate for changes in the Ethiopian FNS policy. So a quick view on the methodological framework. We took a public policy perspective rooted in an introduction in sociology. So basically, I'm a sociologist, so I'm kind of scared to speak in front of so many economists. just to make it. So we focused on the relationships between donors and aid agencies, and between aid agencies and the ministerial agencies. So our focus was based on a collective action perspective. So we carried out 28, nearly 30 interviews with different stakeholders, ranging from public administrations to NGOs and donors. And basically what was the aim in such a perspective? The aim was to characterize some behavior, regularized pattern of behavior of those actors, then to characterize how they interact. What are the power relationships between two types of actors? But then, in a third step, to understand how a relationship between two actors has consequences on a third actors, meaning that how the fact that A and B relate in certain manners affect the way B and C relate and the way A and C relate, which is basically the perspective of interactionist sociology, in which basically I'm working. So the Ethiopian case study, very briefly, so this is Ethiopia. You all know that this country is very heterogeneous, with highland and lowlands, and with the insecurity, food insecurity being greater in highlands because of drought. A growing population, plus 2.7% of demographic growth in 2010, which is huge, meaning that the population is likely to double from 2005 to 2020, which indeed has a great implication in terms of food and nutrition security. So as you all know, Ethiopia has a long story of food insecurity until recently. I don't go back on that. And the determinants of that are multiple. Drought and the weather, as was presented this morning. Price volatility, we extensively discussed about that yesterday. Demographic growth, combined with few evolutions of farming system, which is the key point. Like you can have demographic growth without food insecurity if parallel to that you have transformation of farming systems, which is basically the thesis of Bosloop. And lastly, the fact that you have kind of an overexploitation of natural resources and in particular of soils, with important regressions and decrease of land productivity. Second aspect of the context of Ethiopia, which is of importance for us, is the fact that agriculture is a strong pillar of the economy. 40% of the global of the GDP comes from agriculture, and agriculture provides employment and activity for nearly 90% of the poor in the country. And this pillar of the economy is strongly supported by the state and is seen as a way for economic development, as expressed in the 1994 Agricultural Development-led Industrialization Plan, a very important plan, as we will see later on. And lastly, about Ethiopia, just a few words about the fact that the country has been considered as a kind of a model pupil in terms of the implementation of the Paris Declaration. Just to remind you very quickly, the basis or the heart of the Paris Declaration, the aim of this declaration is to improve aid effectiveness by acting on three different components of the relationship between donors and local governments, which are namely ownership, the fact that countries have to design by themselves their development policy, so they have to be the owner of those policies. Alignments, once the countries have developed their own development plan, then they have to align donors' intervention on their needs, and they are not to. And lastly, harmonization, meaning that the different donors have to harmonize their contribution to the local government, taking into consideration his development strategy. The Ethiopian aid structure is said to favor and even to enhance such coordination, harmonization, and alignment of donors. Just to give you a very quick overview of this aid structure, because it's going to be important for the rest of my speech. ED is structured in Ethiopia through the high-level forum, which brings together donors and the government of Ethiopia, and actually the Prime Minister. Under this high-level forum, you can find the Development Assistance Group, which was launched in 2002, so even before the Paris Declaration, which gathered 27 donors, the most important donors for Ethiopia. And this Development Assistance Group has several sectoral technical working groups, seven, which are responsible for different sub-topics of the development policy of Ethiopia. Parallel to this, you have the high-level forum secretariat, under which each ministry of Ethiopia is responsible of a sector working group chaired by an Ethiopian ministry. So you have 7 or 8 of them, which do not correspond exactly to the Development Assistance Group technical working group, but we're going to see them. And of course, you have some interaction between those two kind of bodies. So how is the FNS policy implemented in such a context? First, I will demonstrate how the Ministry of Agriculture managed to align donors' intervention to implement his own food and nutrition security policy. First of all, the Ministry of Agriculture frames the FNS policy as a problem mainly of agricultural development. Arlene has just said that before, and I will try to elaborate on that. First of all, it must be seen that it's the Ministry of Agriculture which is in charge of the FNS policy. So logically, it considers it mainly as an agricultural development problem, even if 3 different situations are distinguished. In what is called favorable conditions, meaning agroecological and socioeconomic favorable conditions, the aim is to favor or to promote agricultural value chain development, so capitalist agriculture and developmental agriculture. In unfavorable conditions, the aim is more to ensure food security through the PSNP that we have already talked about. And in situations where the land is highly degraded, or where you have important problems of soil erosion and where land fertility is decreasing, the idea is more to work on sustainable land management through physical interventions. So in this overall framework, donors' interventions are framed through a specific body, which is the Rural Economic Development and Food Security Working Group, which was created in 2007 to coordinate specifically the FNS policy under the responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture. This body has 3 main tasks, namely to contribute to policy review by issuing position papers. So each time there are some proposition or there are some policy proposition, this working group is asked to review the policy proposition and to propose some suggestions or critiques this policy. Also, this working group is asked to contribute to policy implementation through the design of the appropriate mechanism, depending on the area, depending on different things. And also, the working group is asked to contribute to policy evaluation. So this working group, this sectoral working group, is a piece in the Ethiopian ED puzzle under the Development Assistance Group, which means, which is important, that funds are meant to be pooled in one pool fund managed by the Development Assistance Group, and then that the money will be used by the government as 3 minutes. Okay, thanks. It's gonna fit. So just to show you, this working group is there. So the Rural Employment, Rural Economic Development and Food Security Sectoral Working Group is here in the global architecture of the structure of Ethiopia. So this working group, lastly, is organized in 3 clusters of activities which correspond roughly to 3 situations of intervention. Agricultural growth is managed through the AGP program, so the Agricultural Growth plan program, food security through the food security program and mainly the PSNP, and sustainable land management in area where you have problems of soil erosion. And in this overall, broad framework, each donor is asked to contribute to a specific cluster. And just to give you a specific example, or to name a few, USAID is mainly dedicated to AGP, while the European Union contributes mainly to the PSNP, and the GIZ plus the KfW is working on sustainable land management. So as a kind of intermediary conclusion, this organization is kind of efficient for both the government of Ethiopia and the donors, because funds are attributed where they are the most useful, and aid agencies are asked to do what they know the best. And the case of the German cooperation is a case in point. A point that was recalled a couple of times by donors is that in this structure they can easily disperse their fund, which is very important for them. However, the system efficacy to combat food insecurity is quite ambiguous, and we have several contradictory results regarding that. Other points, the donors find some limitations in this framework, which are like three broad limitations. First of all, they consider that food and nutrition security is not only a question of agricultural development. Agricultural development is not only a matter of value chain development, as expressed in the AGP agenda, and for most donors, familial agricultures need to be taken into consideration, which is not the case at this level. Okay. Right. And the role of the private sector must be acknowledged. So, in this situation, donors use also the REDFS working group as a platform to advocate for changes in the Ethiopian policy. Because first of all, the Ministry of Agriculture finds difficulties to practically drive this working group. It lacks human resources to chair the technical committees, which are basically left to the donor themselves. And inside the REDFS working group, donors find resources to make their concern heard by the policymakers through position papers, and here comes the importance of the expertise and of IDDRI in particular, through the fact that the REDFS is presented as a success story, meaning that the Ministry of Agriculture is to some extent forced to take into account views that are expressed inside of the body. And inside of the REDFS, donors can find allies, especially other ministries and NGOs. So they push for different changes in the current FNS policy. There are here a few of them. So conclusion and takeaway, just to conclude very quickly, our thesis was that the REDFS is a platform which at the same time aligns donors and aid agencies' action to the Ethiopian FNS policy, but allows them to advocate for changes in this policy, which is the interesting point for us. So even in the context where the government is set to highly direct donors' interventions, there are still some rooms for maneuver for them, and it allows for experimentation and collective learning between ministries and donors, which seems quite important in a context where the policy options to improve food and nutrition security are context-specific. So on a theoretical point of view, this is going to be submitted to development policy review. In terms of policy implication, and this is going to be my last slide, first of all, for Foodsecure, our results show that donors and aid agencies can benefit from researchers' inputs in different fields. First of all, to design policy implementation, innovative projects which are context-based. Evaluate those innovations, and here not only quantitatively but also qualitatively, meaning that there's a need to shed light on the socio-political mechanism or processes that lead to failures or not and success, and not just to say, well, this is a success and this is a failure, and to measure that, but to shed light on the processes behind those failures or successes. And for donor and agencies, there are two questions to which we can contribute maybe. What to expect from intervention strategies which are designed or formulated in the head office, meaning that like which gonna be negotiated once they will arrive in the country? And to which extent can the donor be accountable for projects and policies which have been aligned on local government decisions? Okay, thank you for your attention and sorry for your time.